Conference will now be recorded.
Hey everybody, this is Dr. Doug Smith. It's 2:30 on a Wednesday, so it's time for our 2:30 Monday through Thursday podcast. It's a podcast where you will hear the science about what actually happened to people during the opioid crisis. And yesterday we started giving an update on the book. We are currently editing chapter 5. The book is written, but after you write a book, then you go back through and edit it, and that's what we're doing. We're on chapter 5 right now, so we can see the end. We're getting there. It's a good book. I like the book a lot. I hope you like the book too. Uh, Chapter 3, we explain in detail the science of what happened. What happens when you get sick? Our people took opioids for a period of time, and then when they tried to stop taking the opioids, they got sick. What's behind that sickness? That's what chapter 3 is all about, is the science behind the sickness, what we call the signature disease. Most people call it opioid withdrawal. And then chapter 4 is the actual science behind the poisoning itself, what's called DNA methylation, the addition of a carbon and 3 hydrogens onto very specific sites called CpG sites within your DNA. Okay, the toxicity to the DNA, the damage to the DNA. We go through the science behind that in great detail, and then in chapter 5, okay, we're kind of laying out how did this. Okay, we got the fact that the opioid crisis happened, but how did it happen on such a massive scale? How did it get to be so big? Why is it 5 million deaths, not 5,000? How in the world did this thing get bigger than all the deaths and all the wars, all the deaths from COVID, all the deaths from HIV? Okay, this thing is as big as the number of people that died in the African slave trade, the number of people that died in the Jewish Holocaust, the number of people that died in the genocide of the American Indians. You were talking about 5-6 million people. How did it get to be so big? And there's 2 things you need in order to have an opioid crisis of that size. First, you need a massive amount of medically unnecessary opioid. Okay, and secondly, you need the psychiatrist to be able to scale their nonsense. Okay, the psychiatrist has to scale their misinformation. And so how did those 2 things happen? How did we end up with this massive medically unnecessary quantity of opioid? That's what it's going to take to drive the opioid crisis. And how did the psychiatrists obtain the scale to push out their information on a coast-to-coast nationwide basis? And what you're looking at on the screen right there is we're getting to the heart. Oh, and by the way, we're going to give you answers to both those questions. Chapter 5 of the book will give you answers to both those questions. And so what we're looking at right now is how did we get this massive medically unnecessary quantity, this huge supply of opioid in the country when basically there are laws against it? Okay, the African slave trade happened because there were laws that allowed it. Okay, the Jewish Holocaust happened because there were laws that allowed it. Hitler made the laws. Okay, the Native American genocide, the genocide of the U.S. Indians, happened because there were laws that allowed it to happen. But the opioid crisis is a little bit different. There are laws that were there to prevent it from happening. There were laws on the book to prevent an opioid crisis. Okay, so that's how it's the opioid crisis, and the what we call the pharmaceutical genocide. It may be on the same magnitude as the number of deaths in the African slave trade, the number of deaths in the American Indian genocide, the number of deaths in the Jewish Holocaust. Okay, so there's some similarities there in the number of deaths, but it differs in that there were laws on the books to prevent it. And so the question becomes, if there were laws on the books to prevent it, how did it happen? There were laws on the book to prevent a buildup of medically unnecessary opioids in the country. So how did it happen? How did it happen? Now, I'm about to tell you how it happened, and it's so stunningly simple you're not going to believe it. Okay. All right. The question is, how did we get these massive warehouse full of essentially oxycodone? That's what drove OxyContin, was oxycodone. So that's what the question becomes: is how do we get these massive full warehouses of oxycodone when the amount of opioid that's allowed into the country is limited? Okay, and the reason it happened was Johnson & Johnson got around the rules. That's how it happened. Johnson & Johnson got around the rules. I believe, this is my opinion, I believe what Johnson & Johnson did was illegal. Okay, tomorrow we'll show you the actual law that I think they broke. Okay, it's called the 80-20 rule. It's been on the book since 1981, the 80-20 rule. And the 80-20 rule says very clearly 80% of all the narcotic raw material, NRM, narcotic raw material, 80% of all the raw material has to come from two countries. And those two countries were Turkey and India. Okay, that's what the law says. That's a law. Okay, but here's the catch. Okay, the way it was measured, there's nothing wrong with this. It was done the right way. It was measured based on the amount of morphine. Okay, it was based on the amount of morphine. So what Johnson & Johnson did was they went to Australia, specifically went to the island of Tasmania, and they genetically modified the poppy so it made no morphine, called the Project Norman, stood for no morphine. They made a poppy that made no morphine. It made all thebaine. Well, the law didn't specify against thebaine. It specified against morphine. Why did the law specify against morphine? Because that's what the poppy flower made. How did Johnson & Johnson get around that? They genetically modified. They made a super poppy. Okay, they created a Frankenstein that made no morphine and only made thebaine. Okay, by the way, thebaine is very, very similar to oxycodone. It's very simple to turn thebaine into oxycodone. And so they imported all this thebaine and got around the law. How'd they get around the law? Because the law said morphine, and they imported thebaine. And the DEA let it go by. The DEA let it happen. And that's what's on the screen in front of you. Okay, let me read this to you. As discussed previously, the 80-20 rule. Now that's the rule that protected the Americans. That's the rule that protected the citizens. As discussed previously, the 80-20 rule is calculated based on the amount of morphine alkaloid, morphine, contained in the narcotics raw material, NRM. As this discussion relates to the amount of thebaine alkaloid, thebaine, in the narcotic raw material, not morphine, the 85% obtained by the United States of Australia does not violate the principles of the 80-20 rule. Okay, let me tell you what you're reading right now. You're reading absolute garbage. Okay, this is absolute 100% garbage. Okay, the difference between morphine and thebaine is a difference between a yellow car and a red car. Okay, how Johnson & Johnson got the DEA to do this is unknown. Money's got to be at the heart of this. There was absolutely no reason to let that thebaine into the country. It all went into OxyContin, all of it. This is where the OxyContin came from. OxyContin would not have existed. Okay, there wasn't enough oxycodone in the United States to drive the OxyContin market. Okay, so what did Johnson & Johnson do? They went to Australia, genetically modified the poppy plant, made a Frankenstein, made a super poppy that made only thebaine, and got around the law. And the DEA allowed it. The DEA did not do their job. What the DEA should have done was stopped the thebaine from coming into the country. And that would have prevented the opioid crisis. It was right there. All you had to do was uphold the principle of the law. Okay, for the DEA to say, as you see on the screen right there, The 85% obtained by the United States from Australia does not violate principles of the 80-20 rule. Oh my gosh, it was a yellow card, not a blue one. This is the craziest thing. And this is what killed a lot of people. Okay, this is what triggered the opioid crisis, is the DEA not doing their job. Okay, the laws were on the book, and it's very clear what the laws were trying to do. The laws were trying to prevent an opioid crisis from happening. The DEA let it happen. So we're going to be talking about this for a few days. Okay. By the way, the document that you see there, that's where this came from. So if anybody wants to do their research and double check and verify what we're saying, that's why we put that document on the screen right there. All right, we'll hold right here. Thank you for joining us on our podcast. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to us. Don't forget to post this podcast on your social media, everybody else's social media. Let's get the word out there, and we will see everybody back tomorrow. Have a good evening.